What you need to include in Act One. I'm Karen Beery with Right Now Editing, where we turn good manuscripts into great books.
And I'm Peg Thomas, multi-award winning author and editor, and we are two editors for 5 minutes.
I'm going to get my timer started here, and we are going to talk a little bit about um, Act One in a manuscript. Before we go any further, we were just chatting about how we're going to put this in terms of the three-act structure because it's very common. Some people use the four-act structure. If you do the four-act structure, just know that we're going to talk about one, two, and three, and two is going to be your two and three. We'll remind you about that next week. Because this week we're going to talk about the first act. Peg, what do we need to put in Act One of our novels?
Well, first, I like to think of Act One as the first 25% of the book, 20 to 25%, because it's a good idea to have an idea how long that first part is. So you know how much you need to put in there to make it work, right? One of the things that I find that really kind of doesn't work is when people write the first act and it's like a chapter because like you have said before, it doesn't give you any setup. It doesn't give you any time to know who your characters are, to get to know them, to get invested in them, to understand your setting, to understand your time period. Um, you can't do all that in a chapter without rushing it like crazy. And there's a certain structure to storytelling that says the acts need to be a certain length to stop from having that dreaded saggy middle, right? So we always want to be building up to that midpoint, right? And then we want to go up a little higher to the three quarter, and then we're sliding into the ending. But if you don't have that upward trajectory, your story goes like this, falls flat. That's what we call boring, saggy middle.
We need to start this over again because you're jumping ahead to Act Two. We need to
Well, let's just
talk about.
explain you what happens and why one is so important.
Okay, well, then we'll keep going.
Okay.
But what do we need then in Act One?
Well, we need to set up the story. We need to drop the reader in the story at an appropriate time of something has got to be happening, but it doesn't have to be the thing that's happening in that opening chapter. Just something has to be happening that's interesting, that introduces the character, that engages the reader, because we want the reader to keep reading. And if we don't engage them right away, they're gone. And but setting the character. Okay, so those three things specifically need to happen in that opening scene to hook the reader. Okay, this opening scene is all about hooking the reader. Today's reader has the attention span of a gnat, a very small gnat, a very young gnat. So we have literally maybe a page or two to grab their interest. It's a big sell, but if we've grabbed their interest in that first page or two, they're going to keep reading and they've got to be invested before, really, before they get out of those first couple chapters, or you're going to lose them.
And the way I like to explain the first act is this is where you need to establish normal.
Yes.
You need to show the reader what your character's life starts like because we need to see what's at stake. And if we don't know why the character so desperately does not want to get married and we just jump right into Act Two without the setup, then we won't understand why the character's running away from someone that they love who's proposing. Well, because you didn't show normal. You didn't show where the character's starting. Um, and as Peg said, it doesn't have to be a big, explosion that starts the story. When I'm helping my authors, I let them know it needs to be some sort of action, but there's that one thing that makes it a little bit different. So going to the grocery store, that's not anything special. But if your character's at the grocery store and she has a whole cart full of food and she can't find her wallet, that's something unusual. It's a little different than normal. But it's now you can look back and say, okay, well, it all started at the time I went to the grocery store and forgot my wallet. There's that little thing that makes it a little different. It's that point of interest that grabs the reader. So make sure when you start your book that you're hooking that reader in, that you're giving them enough setting, enough character introduction, a quick enough glimpse at life that the reader knows what the characters have to lose once we keep the story goes forward. That's where you're going to establish what's at stake.
And as someone who writes historical, you need to establish your world, right? Your world building. If you write
Mhm.
historical, if you write fantasy, science fiction, any of those, you have to establish the world that they live in that time period too, because that's what's going to hook the reader. If they love historicals, they want that. If they love fantasy, they want to know what the world's like. That world building is very, very important. What I like to tell people as far as, you always hear, you want to drop your character right into the action. Well, action isn't always movement. Action can be intense emotion. Action can also be a very engaging or unique character, an unforgettable character. I mean, think of the beginning of The Hobbit, Bilbo Baggins hooked us all right there, right? It was great world building, but also there was this unforgettable character that we met right away, that snagged us. So action doesn't necessarily mean a car has to blow up or something has to crash or someone drops a bomb. And sometimes
And
I
I'm
think
gonna
of
have to cut her off
action.
now though, because we're already a minute or so over our time.
That's all I get for being
Let's
early last week.
we have yeah, exactly. So that's our 5 minutes. We're gonna go next week. We're gonna talk a little bit about Act Two or Act Two and Three. We might split it up into two. We'll see. So come back next week. I'm Karen Beery.
And I'm Peg Thomas, but we'll see you next time.